Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The argument lasted less than a minute, but by the time Prince William entered the Windsor corridor, something inside the royal family had already changed. Princess Charlotte stood shaken beside a closed drawing room door, while Camilla's fictional granddaughter, Lady Amelia, was being separated from her by two stunned attendants. William did not shout. He looked at his daughter, asked one quiet question, and within hours, made a decision that nobody around the king expected him to make. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William crouched beside Charlotte and lowered his voice. "Did she put her hands on you first?" The young princess answered quietly as Catherine guided her toward a nearby room. This Windsor weekend had gathered Charles, Camilla, the Wales family, and selected relatives under one roof. Amelia had recently received the fictional designation Young Royal Companion, an honorary palace role for ceremonial visibility rather than a constitutional royal title, allowing appearances at selected family events. Catherine refused to let anyone dismiss what had happened as youthful temper. Charlotte was frightened that the argument had become physical and deeply uncomfortable that attendants had witnessed it. Her mother closed the door behind them and made one thing clear: protecting her daughter did not require turning Amelia into a public enemy. William had already moved beyond embarrassment. He walked directly to his private office, where an internal removal order waited. Camilla froze when she learned what he had done. The Queen Consort insisted Amelia should have been corrected privately, not stripped of the designation and barred from ceremonial appearances involving Charlotte, George, or Louis. Yet the prince would not reconsider. A documented account prepared by a senior aide recorded that Amelia had repeated a deeply personal remark about Charlotte, claiming she heard it from an adult connected to Camilla's household. That detail changed everything. William read the account twice, then asked one question: who had given Amelia those words? No one answered. He set his pen beside the signed order and said the fight was no longer the only problem. Someone had allowed adult resentment to travel downward until two younger members of the family were carrying it. Charles received notice before Camilla reached him. The king now faced a choice he could not avoid: defend his wife's family, or accept that his granddaughter had been pulled into something far older than one corridor fight. Before he could challenge William, he first had to discover why the girls had reached that breaking point, and who had allowed private bitterness to become a weapon in the hands of children. Behind the palace language of titles and consequences were two young people carrying tensions they did not create. Charlotte had spent years learning that every public gesture could become a headline. Amelia had entered royal surroundings through Camilla's side of the family, close enough to privilege to feel its pull, but never secure enough to belong completely. Their argument therefore exposed something more painful than rivalry. It exposed the emotional cost of adults, allowing unresolved resentments to reach the next generation. Catherine sat beside Charlotte and handed her a glass of water. The Princess of Wales had spent years protecting her daughter from the pressure that came with being raised inside the Wales family, where even a small mistake could be judged as evidence of character. Ceremonial expectations meant the formal duties, appearances, and standards attached to royal life, and Charlotte already understood that her behavior reflected not only on herself, but also on William and her mother. She stared at the floor and said she wanted no apology arranged in front of cameras. Catherine answered immediately. There would be none. Charlotte expected anger. Instead, her mother gave her something harder. Catherine told her that defending herself was one thing, but allowing somebody else's bitterness to control her actions was another. The girl admitted she had said something cruel during the argument, and the confession only deepened her embarrassment. She did not feel victorious. She felt exposed. William's decision had protected her, but she knew protection could not erase the fact that two young relatives had lost control because of tensions neither had created. Camilla faced a very different kind of pain in another room. Amelia insisted Charlotte had mocked her place inside the family and made her feel as though every invitation, every ceremony, and every privilege could be taken away at any moment. Her honorary designation had given her ceremonial visibility, but it had never made her a constitutional royal. That difference mattered, because Amelia had spent months wondering whether she truly belonged or was merely being tolerated through the queen consort's connection. Camilla listened until one detail changed everything. When she asked Amelia what had been said first, the younger woman hesitated, then admitted during a private recorded conversation with her grandmother that she had confronted Charlotte with a claim about William supposedly wanting Camilla's relatives pushed away from future royal events. The queen's expression hardened. Charlotte had never heard that accusation before, and Amelia could not explain why she had believed it so completely. Amelia repeated the wording more carefully, and Camilla suddenly recognized it. Parts of the phrase echoed a tense adult conversation from weeks earlier, one that had never been intended for younger ears. Her defensiveness began to collapse, because the question was no longer simply who had started the fight. The deeper question was, who had allowed private resentment to travel far enough that Amelia could use it against Charlotte? The trail now led backward, away from the Windsor corridor, and toward one earlier family gathering. And once that night was examined closely, the moment everyone should have recognized as the true beginning would become impossible to ignore. The Windsor fight did not begin in that corridor. Its real beginning came 3 weeks earlier, during a private family dinner at Clarence's house, when one harmless question about an upcoming ceremony turned into a confrontation over belonging, influence, and the future shape of the monarchy. What happened around that table never appeared in any official announcement. Yet one sentence spoken after dinner would later reach Amelia almost word for word, and when Charlotte heard it thrown back at her, the damage became impossible to contain. Charles had expected the evening to remain calm. He, Camilla, William, Catherine, and selected relatives had gathered to discuss participation in an upcoming summer ceremony, one of the formal public events used to represent the crown and organize family appearances. The problem began when aides proposed expanding ceremonial positions for relatives without defined constitutional duties. Amelia's fictional honorary designation was included. William immediately questioned whether temporary family privileges were slowly becoming permanent expectations. Camilla heard something sharper beneath his objection. The queen consort reminded him that her relatives had spent years entering rooms where they were never fully sure they belonged. She believed the future king was drawing an invisible boundary around his own branch of the family, protecting his children, while quietly pushing everyone else further away. William denied that bloodline had anything to do with it. His concern, he said, was structure, limits, and avoiding confusion over who actually represented the monarchy. Catherine watched the discussion harden. The Princess of Wales noticed William's voice change when Camilla brought Charlotte, George, and Louis into the argument, suggesting they were increasingly treated as though no other younger relatives mattered. He pushed his chair back slowly and answered with a restraint that made the room even colder. His children, he said, were not bargaining pieces in arguments about palace status. Charles said nothing at first, but the silence from the king only made the division feel deeper. Camilla left the table feeling diminished. Later that evening, she told a trusted household aide, during a private conversation, that William was clearing the future court before he even inherits it. The remark was never meant for Amelia, yet according to a later documented account from that aide, the frustration was repeated carelessly days afterward, and the wording changed as it traveled. Amelia eventually overheard the harsher version. William, she was told, wanted Camilla's family gone when Charles is gone. She carried those words with her until they became resentment, and resentment waited for a target. That target became Charlotte. William would eventually trace the Windsor fight back to this dinner, and when he did, Amelia's punishment would stop being the whole story. 3 weeks later, those private words returned in a corridor, and this time he would confront Camilla directly, without allowing Charles to stand between them. When William entered the private sitting room, Camilla was already waiting. No aides stood between them. No secretary carried messages. No carefully drafted palace language could soften what had happened to Charlotte. Camilla wanted Amelia's title restored until a family review could be completed. William wanted to know why a young woman from her household had approached his daughter carrying words born inside an adult dispute. Neither intended to retreat, and Charles was still several rooms away. Camilla moved first. She pushed the removal order toward William and accused him of turning one ugly argument into a permanent judgment on Amelia. The fictional honorary designation had existed through palace discretion, meaning it was a ceremonial privilege granted by the royal household rather than a legal title protected by law. William told her that was exactly why he had authority to withdraw it when conduct crossed the line. The queen consort stared back at him, furious that he had acted before the family could review everything together. William refused to soften the point. Charlotte had already faced consequences privately for the cruel words she admitted using during the fight, and Catherine had made certain their daughter understood that royal protection did not erase personal responsibility. But Amelia had pushed her, then repeated confidential claims drawn from adult conversations. The prince said those were separate issues. Camilla answered that her granddaughter was now being treated as dangerous, while Charlotte remained shielded by rank, family, and public sympathy. Camilla reached for the order again. William placed 2 fingers on it first. "This is staying exactly where it is." The words were quiet, but the message was absolute. He then produced a documented account prepared after the Windsor incident and told her Amelia had repeated phrases that could be traced directly to the Clarence House dinner. His anger changed shape as he asked whether Camilla had discussed his supposed plans for her family where younger relatives might hear. Camilla hesitated. That hesitation mattered more than denial. She insisted she had never spoken to Amelia about William's intentions, but she admitted venting afterward to a trusted household aide. The queen remembered the exact frustration she had expressed, and suddenly, the distorted words Amelia later carried into the corridor no longer felt mysterious. Her fury gave way to unease. Something she had said in private might have started the chain that ended with Charlotte shaken behind a closed door. Charles entered only after that admission had landed. The king expected to find an argument over punishment. Instead, William turned toward his father with one final demand: identify the aide who allowed those words to travel. Yet stripping Amelia's designation was only the first test. The harder question was whether the future king truly had enough authority to make that decision survive the objections of both Charles and Camilla. Palaces rarely announce where power is moving before everyone inside can already feel it. Charles remained king, Camilla remained queen. Yet the confrontations surrounding Charlotte exposed a reality that had been developing quietly for years. William controlled more of his children's ceremonial environment than many outsiders understood. When Charles finally reviewed the order stripping Amelia's fictional designation, he discovered that overturning it would require more than a father overruling a son. It would require him to openly challenge William's authority over his own household. Charles studied the internal arrangements with his private secretary and quickly saw the problem. Amelia's honorary designation had been attached to appearances jointly coordinated with the Prince and Princess of Wales, meaning it functioned as a palace privilege rather than a permanent constitutional entitlement. In simple terms, it gave her access to selected ceremonial duties, but it did not guarantee her a place at them. William therefore held practical control over whether she appeared beside his children, and reversing that decision would force the king to intervene directly. Camilla understood what that meant before anyone explained it to her. She wanted Amelia protected from permanent humiliation, but the queen also knew that forcing the issue could expose the family division publicly. Charles saw her distress and felt the pressure from both sides. Charlotte had been pulled into an argument built by adults, yet Amelia was now carrying the full weight of a punishment that would be noticed beyond private rooms. Every choice wounded someone. William made his position clear in a private conversation with his father. The prince told him he would not allow the language of family harmony to become an excuse for keeping hostile tensions around George, Charlotte, or Louis. Charles listened without interrupting. The future king was not asking to control everyone around him. He was drawing a boundary around his children, and that distinction made the decision harder to challenge. Charles then received the household review. The documented account confirmed that Amelia's designation had always been discretionary and could be withdrawn without parliamentary action or a public legal process. More damaging was the aide's statement. In the written testimony, the staff member admitted repeating Camilla's frustrated words during a conversation Amelia later overheard. The missing link was no longer missing. Charles removed his glasses and set the account face down. Camilla asked whether William had been wrong. The king did not answer. His silence carried more weight than any formal ruling. Camilla understood immediately. Amelia's title was not coming back, and within hours, the queen would have to tell her herself. The punishment became real only when Camilla had to say the words herself. Amelia had expected Charles to intervene. She had expected the family to call the fight youthful anger, issue private apologies, and quietly restore everything once tempers cooled. Instead, the queen entered her room without an aide and told her the honorary designation was gone permanently. For the first time since the Windsor confrontation, Amelia stopped defending herself and asked whether the king had chosen Charlotte over her. Camilla did not answer that question immediately. Charles had already decided William's removal order would stand, while Catherine had insisted there would be no public humiliation, no deliberate photograph ban, and no retaliatory statement aimed at Amelia. The honorary designation had been a ceremonial privilege tied to selected appearances, not a permanent constitutional right. Palace planners therefore removed her from 2 fictional summer engagements and reassigned the small duties attached to the role. The change was immediate, and for Amelia, brutally clear. Amelia looked at her grandmother and said she finally understood how fragile her place had always been. She had been encouraged to believe she belonged inside royal life, yet one mistake had been enough to strip away the symbol that made that belonging feel real. Camilla felt the accusation, but she did not fight it. The queen admitted something harder instead. Amelia had behaved wrongly, but the adults had failed her too. Resentment from the Clarence House dinner had been allowed to travel beyond the room where it began. Amelia broke her silence in a private recorded conversation with Camilla and admitted what happened seconds before the fight turned physical. She had repeated the claim that William wanted her side of the family pushed out. Charlotte had answered, "That isn't what my father said." In that instant, Amelia realized the story she had carried for weeks might have been exaggerated. She pushed the princess anyway. Camilla went still. That admission destroyed the last argument she had been holding on to. The queen could defend a young relative who had been misled. She could not pretend Amelia had acted without choice once doubt had entered her mind. Protecting her no longer meant denying responsibility. Camilla reached toward the dressing table, picked up the small ceremonial pin connected to Amelia's former role, and placed it inside a drawer. Amelia watched her close it, then asked for something nobody expected. She wanted to apologize to Charlotte privately, without William, Charles, Camilla, or any palace official in the room. The title was gone, and the palace machinery had already moved on. But the emotional conflict could not end until the 2 young women at its center finally spoke, without their families speaking for them. There were no secretaries in the room this time. No king, no queen, no future monarch making decisions for either of them. Charlotte and Amelia sat opposite each other, with Catherine waiting beyond the closed door, and Camilla deliberately staying away. The conversation was not designed to restore a title or repair an image. It existed for one reason only: to separate what the girls had actually done to each other from the resentment adults had allowed them to inherit. Catherine had agreed to the meeting only after Charlotte asked to hear Amelia herself. The Princess of Wales refused another apology, carried through relatives, aides, or palace statements, because that would leave the real emotions untouched. William accepted the meeting, but he made one condition clear beforehand: forgiveness would not automatically restore the ceremonial consequence. Amelia's former designation had been an honorary privilege attached to selected royal appearances, not a permanent right, and the prince wanted responsibility separated from reconciliation. Amelia spoke first. She apologized for pushing Charlotte, and for repeating the claim about William wanting Camilla's relatives pushed away from future royal life. Then she admitted the part that hurt more. She had wanted to believe the rumor, because Charlotte seemed to possess something she never had, a certainty that she belonged. Jealousy had made the distorted story feel believable long before she had any proof. Charlotte listened without interrupting, then admitted her own cruelty. During the argument, she had told Amelia that a borrowed palace title did not make her royal. The princess said she regretted the sentence almost immediately, even before the confrontation became physical. That admission changed the tone. Neither girl could pretend the other had carried all the blame. Amelia then explained the source in a private recorded account prepared after the meeting. She confirmed that the household aide had repeated the distorted remark within earshot, but had never told her to challenge Charlotte or act on it. There had been no secret order, no planned confrontation, no deliberate trap. Resentment, overheard words, and insecurity had done enough damage on their own. Amelia stopped halfway through another explanation. "I was angry at your father, so I made you pay for it." Charlotte stayed silent before answering. That was the part that hurt. The words did not erase what happened, but they ended the argument neither had known how to end before. Charlotte later told William she accepted the apology, but did not want him restoring Amelia's title simply to prove the family was united. The answer surprised him. The girls had reached peace before the adults had, and just as that private anger finally faded, the outside world was about to discover that a royal privilege had disappeared. The palace had managed to keep the fight private. It could not hide an empty place forever. At the next ceremonial engagement, photographers immediately noticed that Amelia was missing from the position she had occupied only weeks earlier. By midday, the change had become the dominant royal story. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any headline. William leaving the engagement holding Charlotte's hand, while Camilla walked several steps behind them, expression fixed, saying nothing. Palace communications moved quickly. A restrained fictional statement confirmed that Amelia no longer held the honorary young royal companion designation, a ceremonial role that had allowed her to appear at selected family events without making her a constitutional member of the monarchy. Officials refused to explain the Windsor altercation. That silence protected both girls, but it also created a vacuum. Broadcasters began linking Amelia's sudden absence with the earlier family gathering, and commentators questioned whether William was becoming far more willing to draw hard boundaries around his children. Camilla feared the story was moving somewhere crueler. The Queen asked Charles privately to prevent aides from leaking details that could turn Amelia into a public villain. She had accepted that the designation was gone, but she would not accept seeing a young relative destroyed for one terrible mistake. The king agreed that the internal accounts should remain sealed, and he warned his household that protecting Charlotte did not require sacrificing Amelia. William took exactly the same position. The prince told his communications team that nobody was to brief against the young woman, even anonymously. Charlotte had been hurt, and he had acted to protect her, but he refused to turn public sympathy into revenge. That restraint surprised some around him, because the media pressure was now offering him an easy victory. The story changed again when a national broadcaster described the decision as the clearest demonstration yet that William intends to control the culture surrounding the next generation of royals. Suddenly, the argument was no longer being framed as one fight between two girls. It became a debate about the future king, family boundaries, and what kind of monarchy he intended to shape. Outside Windsor Castle, that debate became impossible to ignore. A small crowd gathered as the family departed. Some called Charlotte's name. Others held newspapers carrying the fictional front-page headline, "William draws the line." William kept hold of his daughter's hand, then briefly looked back toward Camilla. She met his gaze. Neither smiled. Neither turned away. The headlines made the moment look like William's victory and Camilla's defeat. Inside Windsor, however, the family had already reached a final decision far more complicated than either image suggested. And this time, nobody intended to reverse it. In the end, William did not reverse his decision. Amelia's honorary royal designation remained withdrawn, and Charles did not challenge him. Yet the family also refused to let one violent argument become a lifelong sentence between two young relatives. The final resolution carried no triumphant winner. Charlotte received protection without revenge. Amelia faced a consequence without being banished from the family. Camilla was forced to confront how adult resentment had shaped younger emotions. And William discovered that authority mattered most when he knew where to stop using it. Charles formally closed the internal review and accepted the aide's resignation from duties involving sensitive family conversations. The king also confirmed that Amelia's designation would not be restored. An internal review, in simple terms, Was the palace process used to examine what had happened and decide what consequences should follow. The decision drew a clear line between family membership and ceremonial privilege. Amelia could still attend strictly private gatherings, but she would no longer hold the position that had placed her beside working members of the royal family. Camilla struggled with that distinction at first. The Queen felt William had permanently reduced her side of the family, but a private recorded conversation with Amelia finally changed her thinking. The young woman admitted that restoring the title would make the apology feel meaningless. That confession struck harder than any argument. Camilla understood that protecting someone did not always mean giving back what they had lost. William carried a different fear. He told Catherine privately that seeing Charlotte pulled into adult resentment had frightened him more than the physical fight itself. The Princess of Wales reminded him that protecting their daughter meant more than removing hostile influences. It also meant refusing to let bitterness become something Charlotte inherited from the adults around her. He understood the warning immediately. Camilla later met William without aides present, and admitted the Clarence House remark should never have escaped that room. The prince acknowledged that his own language about future boundaries had been colder than necessary. Neither apologized for protecting their families, but both accepted that distrust had turned private frustration into something dangerous. Charlotte provided the real ending days later. At a private family lunch, Amelia quietly asked whether she could sit beside her. The princess moved her chair slightly and made space. There was no dramatic embrace, and no instant return to what existed before. There was simply a choice not to keep fighting. William noticed them speaking normally before leaving. He looked toward Camilla. She gave him a small nod, and he returned it. The title remained gone. The punishment stood. The apology was accepted. The family finally understood the lesson. The crown could impose consequences, but only humility could stop those consequences from becoming another generation's feud. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.